Good afternoon. I'd like to begin our regularly scheduled meeting for the MCAG Governing Board. Today's Thursday, December 19th. And at this time, if I could ask everybody to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by our Vice Chair, Paul Creighton.
Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for your service to the military as well. Thanks for leading that. Next, we have the invocation. Do we have anybody present to... Lloyd, would you like to do our invocation?
Heavenly Father, I ask that you come into this room, and Lord, and that you guide us in our decisions. We're tasked with big budgets and people's decisions that affect people's lives. I pray that you give us a clear mind and a pure heart to make those decisions for the best of the citizens of Merced County. And Lord, I just pray that over this holiday season that you keep our citizens safe and protected, especially our first responders who oftentimes are in harm's way. And thank you for protecting our sheriff deputy the other day and letting that bullet hit the vest and not flesh. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Lloyd. We'll move to item number 4, which is approval of the agenda. Oh, roll call. Sorry. I already marked that off. See? I say everybody's here. Yeah.
Director Aguilar?
Present.
Director Creighton?
Here.
Director Espinoza?
Present.
Director Hogue?
Here.
Director Lohr?
Here.
Director Murphy?
Here.
Director Oliveira?
Here.
Director Pereira?
Here.
Director Silvera?
Present.
Director Vialta?
Here.
Chair McDaniel?
Present. We have a quorum. Thank you. Now I'm looking at item number 4, approval of the agenda with any comments.
Chairman, I
Yes,
have a amendment I'd like to make. Can we move the Merced County Regional Waste Management Authority 18 through 20 to the front?
18, 20.
Or just 18? 18 and 19 to the front of the meeting?
That's item number 18 and 18.
18 and 19, please.
Okay, I have that request. We'll take that as a motion.
Second.
I have a second. I have a first and second. Are there any other comments regarding this?
Can we be more specific as where we're moving? Are we moving it as we're going to take it next, or are we going to, where are we placing it?
Taking it next.
Okay.
After item number, we have to go.
Let's do it after public comment.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Seeing none, motion passes unanimously. Can I get a approval on the rest of the agenda then?
Motion approved.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. At this time, we'd like to open up for public comment. Anybody having anything to speak of to this that this board will oversee? It's 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jose Moran from Livingston, California. And I'm just here. I was hurrying to try and get here at 3 o'clock before you guys started in public comment. Because it is very hard to get here to your meetings at 3 o'clock. And also to let you know, and that I'm very disappointed that you guys did not take seriously the request to change the meeting time to a later time. 3 o'clock is very difficult for anybody that has a 9-to-5 job or a regular job where 90% of the people are not able to attend. And if you're really here to consider people's decisions that change people's lives, I think that should be reconsidered and considered for a future meeting. And 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, if not, then just keep on having your meetings at 3 o'clock, or, whenever you have meetings at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, or 10 o'clock, or anything below or before 4 o'clock, you're really not looking forward to have the people that you represent here to really find out what they want you guys to do and approve. Because like earlier, you guys comment at every single meeting, you guys are making decisions that are counting on millions of dollars for the whole entire county of Merced. So please keep that in mind and reconsider that for a future agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. There's anybody else that'd like to comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring up item number 18 at this time.
You could do the recognition first.
What's that?
Yeah. You could just bring 18 at the first item.
Okay, well, I thought we decided to do it right after public comment.
Whatever you want to do.
We did. That was the motion.
Chair's pleasure.
That was the motion, yeah. So we'll go ahead and bring up item 18, which is Merced County Regional Waste Management Authority Monthly Update.
Good afternoon, Chairman and Directors. Welcome, Eric Zetz with Regional Waste Authority. So, here we go. I see my animation is still there. I tried to remove that before we got here. Sorry about that. Okay, so a couple things I'd like to discuss with you all. We've got some update on the SB 1383. We've got a new employee to announce to you all, and then we're going to talk about our tonnages. So the first things, 1383, we sent out some information to the public works directors for your agencies. We're getting ready to hold some meetings with the individuals of the jurisdictions. With those meetings, we will present an individual gap assessment with the jurisdictions. We will talk about measures to the new 1383 law, where those gaps exist.
Oh.
That concludes my presentation. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you had 3 minutes. Sorry about that.
That's pretty indicative of this law. It kind of cut you short. But so we're holding meetings on January 6th, 7th, and 8th, and also on the 29th and 30th. And so we look forward to having meetings with your jurisdictions. I'd like to introduce to you our new diversion program manager. A couple of you did meet him already, but I'd like to have Kyle come up. This is Kyle Loretto, comes to us from Republic Services, and I'm going to turn it over to him and let him give a little bit about himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very nice to meet you. Look forward to working with all of you. To let you know, I did come from Republic Services. Spent about 5 years working with them as their government relations manager. Before that, I spent almost 10 years working with the City of Fresno, working as Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Alan Autry and Chief of Staff for Councilmember Belong Zhang. So I've worked a lot with elected officials, a lot with city staffs, have a lot of familiarity with how organizations work. But as Eric mentioned, SB 1383 is going to be a big part of what I'm going to be working on over the next couple of years. It's a very important law that's coming around, something we hope you folks take very seriously. There are quite a few things the state is requiring of each and every one of you, above and beyond just solid waste and recycling services. So we'll be talking with your staff here next month and probably be coming to speak to each one of your councils in the near future. So very nice to meet you all and look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Kyle. Welcome. Mayor Autry is a good friend, and I knew you looked familiar, so now I place it.
Okay, we'll move right into the November tonnages. And I should add, I think Kyle's going to be a great addition to all of us, so it's good to have him. So our tonnages have stayed stagnant at Highway 59. They have reduced at the Billy Wright landfill. Billy Wright landfill saw a significant reduction. As you can see, you've got the 2018 November numbers associated with the 2019. When I looked at this, I had to do a drill down just a little bit more to kind of get into what the trends were for this. And so here you can see what the 2018 in November looked like. You can see what 2019 looks like, and you see that we've got that drop at Billy Wright. The drop at Billy Wright is directly associated to one hauler that is no longer doing business at our landfill. And so that is something that we risk anytime that we do business with haulers. And so that represents a 17% decline at Billy Wright, 6% overall. And that's the tonnage report for November. I'd be happy to answer any questions on any of that.
Are there any questions? Okay, so now we'll move down to item B. Or was that all covered in the presentation? Then we'll go to 19.
Okay.
Budget amendment for fiscal year 2019-20.
Thank you. So item 19, staff is bringing back a budget amendment. This is direction that your board has given to staff that we need to be open on Saturdays. We've provided you with the information as to what that cost would be. This staff report is bringing on 3 staff individuals full-time, 2 equipment operators, 1 at each of the landfills, and then 1 scale house employee that would go at Highway 59. As we had discussed, this is not an effort to this is staff coverage is what these 3 positions are for. The staff report before you is a budget amendment for a total of $338,424 that is for those 3 positions. This is also an action. This is an action item for opening the landfills, both Billy Wright and Highway 59, full time. And so we currently presently are at 26 full Saturdays and then 26 half Saturdays. This action today would make the site 52 full Saturdays, which is what this board requested. So this is before you as an action item. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it got explained at the last meeting, but I'd like to hear it again.
Sure.
So we're talking about 4 hours for 26 days, but yet we're adding out in almost 6,300 hours worth of labor. So can you make the nexus between the two for me, please?
Right. So what we've got is the 4 hours of labors that you're referring to. We've got 3 employees that have to go and cover shifts during the week for that staff to be open and available to the public on the Saturdays. So I don't know that I completely get your math methodology of the 4 hours, but what I presented to you last board meeting was 3 positions at $340,000, I think it was might have been $350,000. What you see with the cost of these 3 positions is $341,000. So we were fairly close to what that labor cost was going to be. The staff is going to be to help right now. Currently, Mondays are the day that are the least staff for our site, so that those employees can work on Saturdays. What this ends up doing is now we'll have staff off, say, on a Tuesday, just to work that full-time day on Saturday. And so...
Yeah, but we're only adding operations being open 104 more hours a year, but you're asking for 6,240 hours of increased labor. So I'm seeing 100 hours, I'm seeing 6,000 hours, and I'm just not understanding the nexus.
Right, so you've got 26 half days, and on those 26 half days, the half days at which the public is not accessing that site, you would not have an equipment operator working on those other pieces of equipment to compact that waste. They would go out and do other things. The scale house employees may go home, or they may end up working on other assignments as needed. And so the additional hours comes with the guarantee to service the public. So the additional hours, we need to make sure the scale house, regardless of the level of productivity, is open for anyone that comes to that site, and the individual that's on the equipment needs to be available for anyone that brings waste to that site as well. So this board approved some very lean measures to make sure that the landfill sites were reduced and held to a very high standard of operation and efficiency. This is going against those measures that were done. So this is really bringing back the site. One of the measures that was taken was to take the 52 weeks and move them to 26 half days. What this board is deciding to do is make it all full 52 weeks of full days. And so it doesn't equate to a productivity issue. It really equates to a coverage of staffing issue throughout the week.
So on the average Saturday afternoon, now that we're going to be open, that we weren't open, how many employees are going to be working that were not working the Saturdays in past?
Right. So, for example, if we opened up this Saturday, and let me also preface to this item, which I failed to mention. One of the things in your staff report states that this would take effect this Saturday. I would ask this board if it's all possible to start this on January 11th. We are trying to honor the request of the board. At the same time, being that quick of an action does force us to put some employees into work that weren't originally scheduled to do so. This was a scheduled 26 half day. Lloyd, going back to your question, which I apologize, can you ask that again?
Yeah, no problem. So the waste management sites are going to be open an additional 104 hours a year.
Okay.
Right. So you may have 2 or 3 people at each site, but you're asking for 6,000 hours of increased employee time. So I'm having trouble finding the nexus between an additional 104 hours and the 6,000 hour request of increase in labor or workers.
Right. So I don't have that slide here today. I had it at our last meeting, and that slide identified the number of staff that we needed for each site. And that number of staff, to answer your question, does not change with this action. The number of staff needed would continue to be that number of staff. The difference is that we are going lean on a Monday, and most of that staff now is working on those Saturdays with the exception of the scale house clerks. The scale house clerks may in fact go home, or they may work in the Resource Recovery Center building boxes or doing things. And so what ends up happening is for a Monday or a Saturday, you could end up with 6 employees. We will still have 6 employees in those types of actions, but now they will be mandated to work on that site that whole time, and the additional work that we would have normally accompanied and processed and done is now going to have to be put through the week. So, greasing the equipment, going out and doing some of those tasks that we talked about in that list now becomes a function that needs to be handled on a Monday through Friday aspect. And so the additional staff is to help out with those types of movements. We right now currently are using staff to be on a compactor, a front loader, a dozer, a motor grader. And what will happen now is that when the 26 half days are no more, someone's having to man that piece of equipment regardless if there's any material there all the time. So that's the difference. So this does not add additional staffing to help with additional growth of this site. This is a coverage aspect that encompasses 26 Saturdays of being gate ready to anybody in the public that does come to us.
Stacy?
If I could, the way that I have had to kind of keep it organized in my brain is that, we're moving into a 6 days a week schedule. So we already had some days we were open on Saturdays, and we have our half days on Saturdays. So there's that additional hours, but it's about needing another person in rotation at the Billy Wright scale house, needing another person in rotation at the 59 scale house, and another heavy equipment operator in rotation to cover PTO, to make sure that we have adequate staffing. And I think where to somewhat to Director Pereira's concern is that, as Eric mentioned, we've already been operating with a really lean operation of staffing. So the increase in this hour, in these hours, is enough to push us into needing that additional staff person to get into the rotation cycle to make sure we can not only cover the staffing needs for those 6 days a week, but also any PTO or medical leave or anything like that we have to do. So if that's a fair summary.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Mr. Murphy.
So I'm really supportive of opening the landfill. I do have the same questions that Director Pereira has. They're still not clear in my mind. But the other question I have is, are we operating the 2 landfills as a single unit? In other words, do we need to staff up with 3 people if there was an alternative where people were sort of back and forth between sites? Someone was maybe not only dedicated to Billy Wright, but also to Highway 59. Does that occur now or not?
Yes, right now all of our employees they can be moved from one
Anywhere.
site to another. So that happens now.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Silvera.
So I guess, so you can't equate it to we're going to be open an additional 104 hours, because how many employees do we have when we're open? So if it's 8 employees, I would multiply it by 8. So you'd be at, 850 hours, give or take. You're adding additional staffing of 6,240 hours. But in my mind, how I equate it is you look at the fire station. When they have 2.0 staffing at their stations, they got a formula. Let's say it's, in order to be able to have that station staffed, it takes like 2.8 or 2.75 persons in order to be able to fulfill that need. So it sounds to me like this is kind of the tipping point. When you open these additional hours, we can no longer do it with the staff that we have. So you have to add additional bodies in order to be able to meet that need, which is probably going to, as you said, because we're running so lean, we're going to be more efficient, right? So this is triggering us to spend this money to hire 3 additional employees, but they're not just going to service being open this additional 4 hours. We're going to be able to utilize them in other places with the rotation of your staff. That's how I read it. That's how I understand it. Would I be correct in saying that?
You are correct in saying that. Both the equipment operators would work at both sites, the scale house clerk would work at both sites, and they would all assist each other on the scheduling of being a 6-day operation.
So it's not that you might work 3 days at Billy Wright and then 2 days at the 59 landfill, right? And it's you guys have scheduling, you schedule that out. It keeps us. What kind of, if you didn't make this move, what kind of overtime, and I know this is just kind of off the fly here, so you probably don't have an exact answer, but if you didn't add the additional staffing, what kind of overtime would you be having to pay in order to still meet the needs of being a 6-day-a-week facility? Do you have any kind of rough idea?
Right, so we've got 30 employees. We looked at our labor dollar amount last time that staff presented before you, and it was something of the estimate of $30 million. Divided it by 30, came up with about $100,000 per staff, give or take, and that encompasses a fully loaded labor rate of overtime, out of class, differential shifts, and things of that nature. So this will be absorbed if we did not, to answer your question, if we did not hire the 3 additional staff, this will be absorbed through the employees throughout those 6 work days in some capacity. So if we're already running eight employees for a particular day, then maybe what we end up doing is having somebody come in and be a 9th to assist with those other activities that we cannot get done on any given day. So it will be something that Marty, I don't mean to put Marty on the bus, but the sites are run very, very lean. I would say that this additional staff is a request that would come to you if the waste needs of the sites had increased at some point. We know now we're going to need it just on the fact of days off. If you come to the sites on a Monday, right now on a Monday, there are very, very limited staff on the sites right now. And so this is an indication of just the leanness of how lean your operations have been for this time. I've not heard any of you talk about Mondays, but Mondays are the leanest of the sites. And that's because they have to work Saturdays, is what they're doing. And they're doing the additional work on the 26 half Saturdays. So we're answering that responsibility.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, Paul.
Sure. I think this is a great move. As you said, great questions too. We're trying to drill down, be fiscally responsible here. The reason I brought it up and made the request that we open it up full time is our farmers in Merced County have a lot of illegal dumping. So as we talk numbers and finances, it costs our farmers money to haul those mattresses and TV sets off their land, the cities out of the alleys, the TV sets, the other things that are dumped, law enforcement trying to find out who's doing the illegal dumping. Hopefully this additional Saturday and the additional four hours per half-day Saturday will equate to some net reductions in those illegal dumpings in the county. And also, with the addition of the staff, these programs that Kyle brought up, the unfunded mandates that the state's putting on this agency and these communities is going to be pretty daunting. And we need to do everything we can as fiscally responsible as we can. And if you have both facilities running at optimum speed without missing a beat, and Marty doesn't have guys missing time and we fall behind, we could make this money back up in efficiency and also service to the public, because the citizens don't generate a lot of money in the landfill, we were told. However, the citizens pay for all the landfill tipping fees that we had up there on the charts. So as a benefit back to the community, the members of Merced County, that it's our obligation to make it convenient for them and also the people that want to do illegal dumping to hold them more accountable and try to curb this thing and make this a better community. So I applaud what you're doing. I know it's tough. I know the board wants to do things that are fiscally responsible, but I just want to say my hat's off to you, and you guys drilled down pretty good on this one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? No?
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion second. Let me ask the public if the public have any input on this. Seeing nobody, I have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously.
Paul?
Moved by Director Creighton and seconded by Director Lohr.
And this was A and B together, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
sorry.
Yes.
One of my staff, well, Kyle, it's great to have you. I had made the request for the January 11th begin date. I'm not certain if the motion included that.
And the second agrees to it.
I apologize.
Do I need to call for another vote? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that was A and B together, yes. Okay. That was a fruitful conversation. Thank you, everybody. Now we'll move on to item number 6, which is recognition of service of the Citizen Advisory Committee, Mr. Ron Price. Ron has served 2 terms at 8 years on behalf of Merced Irrigation District, and he is known as our water expert. And so at this time, Ron, I'd like to present you.
You talk loud, just talk loud.
Okay. Ron, why don't you join me up here?
I'll interpret, so talk slow.
Ron, on behalf of MCAG, I'd like to thank you for your years of service. And on behalf of this board, thank you for everything you did for us as a water expert.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. Do you have anything you'd like to say? Mike is live now.
Not in particular.
Okay.
I'm not real fond of public.
Do we need? Oh, here we need to. You want to hold that up so we can? This is your last chance, Ron. You can say whatever you want. Okay. Thank you, sir. Now we'll move on to item number 7, the minutes.
Chair, motion to approve the minutes is submitted.
Second.
I have a first and a second. Is there further discussion? You got it. Is there anybody from the public who would like to comment on this item? I have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to item number 8. Mr. Jack Jackson, Citizens Advisory Committee report. It's all yours, sir.
Good afternoon. The Citizens Advisory Committee met on Friday, December the 6th. Presentations were made to the Citizens Advisory Committee with approval of the following item on the agenda today as item number 12. And that is adopt number 2019/1219-01 with a finding of fact that there are unmet transit needs, including needs that are reasonable to meet for fiscal year 2020-2021, and B, approve the unmet transit needs fiscal year 2020-2021 analysis and recommendations report. If there aren't any questions or comments, this completes my report, or our report.
Seeing none, Jack, you got off pretty easy.
Thank you.
Have a Merry Christmas. Okay, now we'll move on to Merced County Association of Governments. Caltrans report, Mr. Tom Dumas.
Just realized how easy you were just then. Continue that. Merry Christmas, everybody. Just a short report for you. Our ATP cycle 5 is coming up again. Caltrans will be resubmitting the applications we did at behalf of Santanella and Hillmar. Hopefully those will be funded this year. Our understanding is this year Caltrans is accepting all the applications from the district, then headquarters will sort through them and then submit 3 or 5 on behalf of the state. But hopefully ours will be lucky and do well this year. We held a climate change forum on the 17th, a couple of days ago there in Stockton. It was very fruitful. I think we had a very good turnout. Our district director was so excited over it. We'll probably have another one this spring, more toward the south end of the district. So if anyone here would like to attend that one, you're a lot closer this time. So that would work out. Intersection 59 in Santa Fe. Last meeting, Director Pereira asked if we could paint and put up a reflector. I called our maintenance guys. They were on it. I drove by it today. It's black and blue, and the reflector's gone. So we keep trying. But at least it's yellow now, so it's starting out with a good color.
Curb's visible.
Yeah, it's doing real well. And in Los Banos, we've got a project at, hold on, let me make sure I'm reading that right, 152 and I Street that they're looking at doing that signal. Should have things started in fall of 2020. They should be ready to list. So hopefully they'll have that going. Other than wishing you happy holidays, that's it. Now it's your turn.
You got it. Director Creighton had a question.
Maybe touch on the funding that got reinstated for the widening to 99, the improvements. We worked with our other colleagues in Madera and the other counties to make sure that we kept the funding local. It didn't go to LA. So can you update us on that?
I'm not an expert on that one.
Okay. Well, I am. We got the funding, and things are going well. Our colleagues, a lot of members of this board supported that and made a lot of phone calls too. So everybody that did their part, it kept the money here in the valley. So good job.
Great.
Director Silvera. Oh, Director Peralta.
Just to update everyone, Dan McElhaney has realized that the dangers on 152, and we've convened a traffic safety committee for 152, not just one, but on a monthly basis, in order to take care of the hazards. And he was a little surprised at the work that hasn't been done. And so he has asked for a short timeline. We've had a number of accidents on 152. In fact, we had another pile up last week. So now that the safety committee is convened, I thank Caltrans for doing that, and he's taking 152 seriously, and I hope everybody else does. Mr. Silvera, I'd like to invite you to the meetings. They'll be on a monthly basis. I've also asked Adam Gray's office to step in, because it's going to take some money to correct what's been neglected. So thank you.
Good.
Director Silvera.
The Santanella project, is there anything that I can do? Can you give me any advice on anything that I could do to help make sure that, our project has the most likelihood chance of success, if that exists?
I will let you know if they're requesting local letters of support.
Okay.
I believe they do, but the process itself is pretty much kind of like a small PID PSR that we prepare. Then we send it through headquarters funding. But as soon as they get to the point, I'll let you know, and if they need letters of support or any other calls, we'll be glad to let you know, so you can do that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Director Espinoza.
Well, first I want to thank Caltrans for helping the county on putting the directional signs towards the sign that says Planana going east. And also, I'm still working on those lights on the roundabout. So the committee, the MAG meeting has requested to have a meeting with Dan McElhaney and on the 8th of January, if it's possible. I know he's probably pretty busy, but I'll send an email requesting that, because we're going to be discussing it. I don't think they want the roundabout. They just want the regular lights. And we're going to request another survey be done, so that way we can push for the lights. Still an emergency plan, because there's been fatalities there. So if you can tell them that, please.
I will. If you don't mind, if you could also CC me when you send the invitation to him. That way I can start preparing what I need to for him.
I will. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions? Thank you, sir. Have a Merry Christmas. Now we'll move on to item number 10, information, which is discussion only. Are there any questions or anything you'd like to bring up on these information items? Seeing none, we will go ahead and move on to item number 11, which is our consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, motion to approve. Second.
I have a first and a second. Is there further discussion? Anybody from the public like to make comment on this item? We have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to item number 12, approve the unmet transit needs finding of fact for year 2020, 2021, and this is Natalia.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm happy to share with you what happened as a result of the unmet transit needs process for fiscal year 2020-2021. Okay, so we're all familiar with the two major sources of public transportation funds that the TDA provides, but I wanted to lead with this slide just to kind of show what the legislative intent is for the purpose of these funds. I think it's important to understand why we have these funds when figuring out what to do with these funds. So as we can see directly from TDA law, these funds are for the development and support of public transportation needs that exist in California. Of course, we as a county do have the provision to use these funds for non-transit purposes if certain conditions are met. So before we use these funds for anything that's not directly related to public transit, we need to annually consult with the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, and we also need to identify the transit needs of the jurisdiction, particularly the unmet transit needs and those that are reasonable to meet. Now, the way that those unmet transit needs are identified is through a citizen participation process where the SSTAC receives public comments from those who are transit dependent. So that's that relationship there. We identify these unmet transit needs through citizens who are expressing their needs, and they're the ones who are dependent on this service. So I'm sure you noticed that we had this unmet transit needs process close in time to the one that we had for fiscal year 2019-2020 in the spring. And that was because we wanted to move the entire process to be in the fall from now on. So the goal is to have this process completed each year before the transit budget discussions begin in January. So this time we did scale back our efforts just a little bit, just because we did such a major outreach in the spring. So by law, we're required to have one public hearing to receive comments regarding unmet transit needs. And this time we held 4 public hearings in the county. 2 of those hearings were held in Merced because it's our most highly attended location, and the other hearings were held in Gustine because we've never held our public hearings for unmet transit needs there before. And also, we've had comments in the past regarding the lack of service there. So we just wanted to go directly to the community for this process this time to show our support. Also, is the same as we did last go around, we made sure that we made it easy for citizens to provide comments in the way that's easy for them. So we accept comments by phone, email, snail mail. We also have an online survey where people could give their comments, and even through social media, we'll take comments that we see through there. So this time there were 12 commenters. 5 of their comments were considered by the SSTAC to be potential unmet transit needs. Oops. So that is the MCAG board adopted definition of an unmet transit need, and that is an inadequacy in the existing public transit services for persons recognized as transit dependent in Merced County. So when you think of an inadequacy in the public transit service. That could be a broad range of things, but the SSTAC focuses on comments that identify locations in the county that do not have transit service at all, or it's unavailable at times when it's needed for necessary life activities like a work or school. And the SSTAC also pays attention to comments that show where accessibility can be improved for those who are disabled passengers who use our transit system. There's a list of the reasonable to meet requirements as adopted by the MCAG Governing Board. And if you want to look at them in more detail, they're in the agenda with all the definitions and all the detail about that. So as mentioned before, there were 5 comments that were considered by the SSTAC to be potential unmet transit needs. Then the SSTAC analyzed those 5 comments against the board-adopted unmet transit need and reasonable to meet definitions. So out of the 5, 1 comment was identified as not an unmet transit need, 1 comment was identified as an unmet transit need that is not reasonable to meet, and 3 of them were identified as unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet, but one of which was a need that has already been identified as reasonable to meet during the spring process, but that solution for that need has not been implemented yet, which we will discuss in a few minutes. So the SSTAC's recommendation to the MCAG Governing Board for fiscal year 2020-2021 is that there are unmet transit needs, including needs that are reasonable to meet. So as a recap, in May, for fiscal year 2019 to 2020, the MCAG Governing Board did approve the finding of fact that there were unmet transit needs, including needs that were reasonable to meet. And these were extending the evening service hours, which that was a need that was again identified during this current process, adding accessibility options to the Bus Live app, and also providing audible announcements on paratransit buses. So solutions to these unmet transit needs have not yet been implemented. There were obvious delays, of course, because TJPA was without a transit manager for a while. We're also in negotiations for an operations and maintenance contract. So TJPA has just hired a new transit manager, which you will meet later on today, Christine Chavez. So coming up with solutions to these previously identified unmet transit needs will be upcoming. But even still, for this current process, the SSTAC has recommended that there are unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet for fiscal year 2020-2021. And they are provide transit service to North of Merced College, and also provide additional service to Planada. So I'll discuss the first one, providing transit service to North Merced. So you can see on the map, the dark blue lines are all the transit routes in the Merced area. The light blue and the purple areas are showing areas that are within a 1/4 mile or a 3/4 mile from a transit stop. That's a walkable distance. And as you can see from the map, north of Cardella, which I'm not sure if the pointer will work. Oops. I'm not sure the pointer is, but north of Cardella in the white space, there isn't any access to transit service within a walkable distance. So there's a considerable number of citizens that also live in that area. And so the SSTAC suggests initially providing some service by expanding existing routes, then doing a more extensive assessment during the next round of route changes to determine how to fully service that area. So the next unmet transit need that SSTAC thought is reasonable to meet is to provide additional service to Planada. So riders who take a morning bus from Planada to Merced have to wait over 4 hours for the next bus to get back home. And so after 1:30, then there's 2-hour headways. So these long headways make the riders who use the P route feel stranded and unreasonably inconvenienced, especially when they are using the P route to get to Merced for necessary life activities like work, school, or even medical appointments. So the SSTAC believes that this has had a negative effect on the P-Route ridership, particularly because people would choose, instead of getting stranded, they would just rather not ride that and use an alternative way or not even make those appointments that they may need to make. So after considering the cost and riders needed to provide an extra loop of service on this P-Route, the SSTAC recommends a further assessment, and that would include community surveys to see when the best time would be to add that additional service. So I'll answer any questions that any of you may have, but I also want to point out that on our MCAG website, we do have a dedicated Met Transit Needs page that has all of the past reports, and that way you can see any background information and what we've been doing in prior years as a result of this process.
Very good, Natalia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I attended one of those hearings.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And those become robust conversations.
Yes.
Those folks who ride the bus actually really know the system and how to improve our system.
Yes, they do.
Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Villalta.
Stacy, not sure if this is the time to ask, but can we get an update at some time on the bus route over the hill and what we're doing to accommodate those folks from Los Vanas?
Yes.
We're on track to release that procurement here this month. That was our goal. So I would have to ask Matt if there's further detail of what that rollout schedule would look like, but we're on track in terms of what we discussed with our schedule.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions to this for Natalia? You're getting off easy, Natalia.
I know.
Good job.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, what is the pleasure of this board? I have a motion.
Second.
And a second.
Supervisor Lowell is the second.
Supervisor Laura is the second. She beat you, but you just speak louder. Are there any other comments from the public regarding this item? Okay, I have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to item number 13, MCAG Administration Building Janitorial Services Contract. Nav Bragi. How are you, sir?
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, the board. Currently, this item is to approve janitorial services for the downtown MCAG office. Currently, the downtown office and the two sites at Regional Waste share one staff person. During the budget process last year, Regional Waste identified that they need one full-time janitorial services. So staff went back and compared, did a pros and cons of hiring a part-time employee versus having contract services, and it was more favorable to have contract services than a part-time employee. So we released a bid, RFP. The evaluation was based on experience, cost, quality of product, and reference. Janitech scored the highest overall. Janitech's cost was comparable to our cost estimate that we had. It's actually cheaper than the staff person that we have right now. So right now our staff person half time is $37,000, and Janitech's cost is $29,000 a year. So, any questions?
Are there any questions? I thought I heard Mr. Silvera push a button over there.
Yes, I did. And so I just wanted to reiterate what I had called Nav about earlier. Is when I first looked at this item, I was like, wow, 100 and some thousand for janitorial service, but it is a 3-year contract. And then after discussing it with him, we also, because it didn't say in the staff report that what the cost to hire an extra help employee, this is actually cheaper to contract out the service, because as part of this contract, they also include like the toilet paper and the trash bags and those type of things is included in the price of the contract. So once I was able to figure out that it was not $102,000 a year, I'm very supportive of moving forward with hiring out this service.
So that was a motion.
That was a motion. Okay.
And Villalta was a second. So I have a first and a second. Are there any other questions for Nav while he's up here?
Sorry, Scott. We can't open our company.
Is there any questions or comments from the public regarding this? I'll bring it back. We have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Nav. Now we'll move on to item number 14, contract amendment for construction of the front office, security upgrades. This is an action item as well. Stacy Guzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item may look familiar. The board did provide budget authority for us to enter into a contract to do the front office security upgrade construction project, I believe, in October, but through that process at the TRB and at the governing board discussion, there was some concern about the aesthetics. The original design was for a 3x3 window to be set within a ballistic sheath drywall, which would replace, when you walk into our office, the big counter in the open space would be a drywall with a 3x3 window. So we went back to the drawing board, went back with our team that we are in contract with, and asked them to provide us with a cost estimate to increase that to include a full counter length window all the way up to the ceiling, and that would require, and what we're requesting is a budget, an amendment to that contract budget to increase it by $20,000 to be able to have that more welcoming full counter length window of ballistic protection plus the ballistic bottom. And it would also allow us to have a second window so that once this project is in place, it will be our sole entry for all public access, and we'll have a window for MCAG and a window for the bus and yards.
Motion approved. I have a motion on the floor. Second. And I have a second. Second was Pereira. Are there further comments or questions on this? We'll move it to the public. Does anybody have any comments about this? All right, I have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll go to Transit Joint Powers Authority for Merced County. Item number 15, approve the memorandum of understanding with Merced College for student transport service. This is an action item. Mary Michael Rawling.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm very pleased to be in front of you today with a memorandum of understanding for a pilot project in partnership with Merced College to provide transit services on our fixed route to all students by simply having them show their current college ID when they board the bus. This is a similar arrangement we have with UC Merced students, and it has come into being because the student body voted to approve a very small registration fee to be assessed every semester. That will help offset the fare box subsidy that we need in order to provide the service. Dr. Ivan Pena, Dean of Student Equity and Success, is here today in the audience if you have any questions you'd like to direct to Merced College. But this would bring in revenue over the spring and summer terms of 2020 of over $112,000. And during the course of this pilot project, we will be collecting data to bring back to the college as we develop a more long-term revenue agreement with them. So I would be happy to answer any questions you have. I think that's it. Thanks. This is just very exciting.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Yes, Mr. Volta.
Is there a fixed route for Los Banos to Merced College too?
There is fixed route from Los Banos to Transpo where they would have to transferred to any number of M lines to get to Merced College.
Okay, and that's still under the same auspices of what we're doing here?
Yes, absolutely. The students could ride any fixed route bus.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. I should also mention that the Board of Trustees voted on this last week and approved it unanimously.
Okay, are there any other questions for Mary Michael?
Motion approved. Second.
So I have a first and a second. That was Volta with the motion and Espinoza with the second. I was looking to the right, so if any of you on the left said it first, I apologize now.
Apology accepted.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Motion passes unanimously. Now we'll move on to item number 16, authorize agreement for transit operations and bus maintenance service provider. This is an action item. Ms. Stacy Guzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I ask Alicia, Christine, and Nav just to come up and sit close? This is going to be a team effort. This whole process for the last year has been a team effort. And so we'll probably, in some ways, all be available for questions or discussion. But I do want to introduce Christine Chavez. She is our new transit manager. We are excited. She's been on board for a couple of weeks now. We stole her from the city of Visalia. She has already proven to be a valuable contribution to the team, as I'm sure you will see as soon as she steps up to the microphone. No pressure. But we do want to welcome her. She's been an excellent addition. Okay, and I realize that I don't have a clicker here, so do you want to be, okay, I'll just use it. Yeah, I'll use this one. That would be great. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So I'm going to start, this is a big item. It's been a lot of discussion. It's been a one-year process. So I'm going to start at the end to let you know where we're trying to arrive, and that's at the staff recommendation. So the staff recommendation is to grant the budget authority for the transit operations and maintenance service provider contract for a base term of 5 years in an amount of $52 million with 2 one-year options. These are one-year extension options with that 7-year total not to exceed $75 million. And that this budget authority would be exercised upon the completion of final negotiations with First Transit. I say that only because we have a few I would say, compared to what we're going to be talking about, minor details to finalize with First Transit. And so we would want to finish those up upon completion of this item today. So in terms of background, we have a current contract with National Express. It is a 5-year contract with 2 one-year extension options, so the same structure that we're proposing with First Transit. The 5-year term it ends in August of 2020. I think something that we've discussed at length over the last few years is that the current contractor has historically struggled with driver shortages, largely due to their low wages, and that there has been several discussions for requested rate adjustments in the past that have not been that have all been denied in one way or through those negotiations have not been satisfied. So as a result of a number of performance issues and some challenges with the contract, we at CJPA have been assessing liquidated damages since January of 18, and those have reduced in number since started, but they still continue to be assessed. And then in the fall of 2018, so a little longer than a year ago, I sat down and the team, we sat down with leadership with National Express, and they again communicated an interest in a rate adjustment, and we also talked about early contract termination at that time. And that was when, at this level, I shared with the board an interest to begin the procurement process for early termination of the contract. So we started that process shortly thereafter. I think it was in November of last year, and we received 3 proposals. There was a couple of things you could ask. That was a bit of time between when the process started and when we had proposals received in July. There was quite a bit of work that we needed to do with our RFP before we released it to make sure that we were protecting the agency from finding ourselves in a similar situation in the future, and also to make some adjustments of how what we wanted this new contract to reflect. As you can imagine, there have been several changes, things like having our own operations and maintenance facility and a number of other things that we needed to make sure that RFP reflected and that the proposals we received also reflected. I think the big takeaway through that receiving those proposals was that all of the pricing exceeded the agency's budget. And the next slide we'll go into that a little more, but those proposals ranged for between 52 million and 62 million, and that was for the 5 years, not the full 7-year potential. So 52 to 62 for the 5-year term, and through that process, First Transit was ranked as the top proposer. I want to mention that this summer was consumed by that evaluation process. We had transit colleagues from the San Joaquin County RTD, Fresno, Clovis, Visalia, Porterville. Christine happened to be as part of that process. Tom with Caltrans participated in that process. I mentioned Visalia, Porterville. So we really leaned on our colleagues in the transit industry, other public agencies in the Valley, to help us go through this evaluation process. And that resulted in the selection of First Transit. So the where we are, I had mentioned that we're still in what we technically would consider a negotiation phase, and that process started in September, both through written and in-person negotiations. We did have the assistance because of some of the staffing issues, and we were transitioning. We were in a period without a transit manager. We did not only rely on our colleagues up and down the Valley to assist, but also a negotiations firm to help us through that process, because as I mentioned, all of the contracts came in above what we had in our budget. We were very successful. First Transit was an excellent partner through the negotiations process, and we were able to reduce the overall cost of that contract. It was very clear that the large proportion of what was left as non-negotiable was the cost of labor, that we do have a 5-year, or the current contractor has in place a 5-year collective bargaining agreement that I think just went into effect in October, and so that just started. And so as we were going through negotiations with First Transit, it was clear that that labor cost and that increased cost of for wages was the large reason behind the increased cost in the contracts, as from what we were expecting. I think it's also important to note that there are statutes in place that do lend to employees being retained through this transition process. Upon adequate performance, these employees would be eligible to be retained under a new contract. That's all handled through the new contractor that would be coming in. But as I mentioned, we are prepared to conclude the negotiations with the new contractor and proceed to contract execution. I do want to go over the budget. In determining the budget, so the top part here is our budget for the current fiscal year for this contract, and how we arrived at putting this number in our budget, because as you can recall, when we were going through our budget cycle, this procurement was still in flux. We hadn't received those new proposals. We knew that the root issue of our current contractors' dilemmas and challenges were in that the current contract was a low bid, and so we knew we needed to increase it, but it was a struggle to determine how much do we increase to anticipate what these new numbers were going to be. How we arrived at 9.6 million was we started by looking at, in the previous proposals from the was that 2015? We looked at those proposals to see what those contracts were proposing the service would cost in this fiscal year, and we we still ended up a bit low. So we were estimating that the contract would come in between $7 and $9 million annually. But still found ourselves having calculated that a little low. But the negotiated price with First Transit ended up at a total of 51.3 for the 5-year total. That is within, actually lower than the initial proposed costs for the initial 3 proposals that we received. So it is definitely in a competitive range on the low end of what we were originally dealing with. I want to mention, though, that while that what this means about, so you'll say, okay, you're saying you have 9.6 a year, that's for this year, how are you going to reach your 10.6, 10.9? You can see by year 3 that dollar amount exceeds our 9.6 budget. A couple of things about the 9.6 number. That assumes that we have no growth in STA or LTF, that we have no new funding sources. It doesn't assume things like the Merced College revenue we just talked about. And I think the big unknown is that it doesn't assume any new grants. One of the first things that Christine, the conversations that we had was, well, where are your grants and how can we get more grants to fill this gap? But I also want to be very transparent that in the absence of all of those things, in the absence of a flat revenue for those existing funding sources and no new additional revenue, that there would be a requirement, there's an implication of the use of all of the LTF that would come in those years, assuming that it wasn't some astronomically high number, but we're assuming the same that we've been getting, about $7 million a year, I believe, and that we do have a reserve fund, and that was largely why we put a push pause on determining an appropriate reserve policy, was because we needed to know what our costs were going to be for the service over the next several years. But that reserve fund is there that we can tap into to make ourselves whole. And that's actually a lesson we took from a neighboring transit agency that did something very similar, because we are not alone in trying to deal with the increased cost to providing transit service. In the industry, it's actually being referred to as the Great Cost Reset. It's very clear, we've been in this conversation with our partners around the valley, that everyone is seeing a significant cost increase. I think why it may be a bit of a sticker shock on our end, actually, I would say it's not only because of the industry cost reset that's largely a result of increased labor costs, but it's also because we're recovering from a contract that was a low bid to begin with. So it's a double whammy in terms of what we're trying to have to recover from. We can also, at this time, our funding sources are not keeping up with the increased cost in the providing the transit service. That could change. It's industry-wide, so we hope that does change. But we are very confident that First Transit's proposal is competitive and that they really do bring a great industry reputation with them with this proposal. And then I think one of the other important things to note about this contract is that it would fix the contract price for 7 years. So what we do know is, just as we saw, trying to look at what this service would have cost us based on projections 4 or 5 years ago, is already higher than what we thought it would be. So by locking in 7 years, you're protecting yourself for that exponential growth of cost out in the outer years. In terms of kind of the unknown costs or the risks of the future, so I think, as I'd mentioned, we are choosing to or proposing to end our contract early, a few months early with National Express, and not executing the contract extension options. If we were to continue with our current contract, we would be procuring again in at least 2 years from now. If not sooner. And those future costs are unknown. And as we've seen, those have traditionally been on the rise, and we can feel pretty confident that they would likely be much higher if we wait to procure in another 1.5 or 2 years. So our analysis at the staff level, when we actually looked at what we would save in the first 2 years, and then the potential unknown of how much more expensive the service would become in year 3, that we are just kicking the can. We're not avoiding an increase to the cost of operating the service. We're delaying it and potentially at risk of incurring even higher costs with those unknown increases in the future years if we don't secure the contract price for the 7 years. And then the last part I think that is important to consider is that regardless of what is decided today, it has become very clear that we need to update our short-range transit plan. We were not intending to do the short-range transit plan for, I think, another year or two, but with these increased costs, with what Natalia shared earlier about the unmet transit needs that are costs in addition to what we're already talking about, there's just a need to do a systemic assessment of what our current system is able to do, how we're going to approach some of these new challenges, what the fiscal outlook's going to be, and then what our service options are. I'll tell you, to be very forthright, the one thing I'm really trying to avoid is service reductions. When we have a community that's telling us we have unmet transit needs and there's more service that we need, I struggle with accepting that the answer then is to reduce service. Sometimes that has to happen, and we're seeing it happen across the industry, all over parts of California, and I'm sure across the country. But that is a goal that we are trying to achieve, is to be able to figure out how to do this without having to make any substantial reductions in service. And that takes me back to where we started. So I'm happy to address any questions, but I will say that I may very well defer to anyone on the team, because this really has been a team effort that's been priority number one for the agency for the last 12 months.
Let's go with Director Pereira, and then I'll go with Murphy. You're after him.
Yeah, Stacy, what is the contract price for the current year with the current vendor?
I have it in here. I'm going to see. Well, I'm going to let Nav tell you, and then while I look up, I have it with me right in front of me.
So it's around 6.8, but I mean, there's other factors that are playing into it. If we do, currently our contract is based on 132,000 revenue hours. And what we're operating at is 142. So the contract is...
I'm good.
Okay.
You don't need to excite. I'm not trying to say...
Well, okay. Yeah, it's about 6.8.
Yeah. So the concern that I do have, though, is that the increases in the first 3 years are all, 9-12%. And so... it kind of levels out once you get out to year 4 and through the balance of the contract. But I mean, we're basically, it's a 30% increase in the first 3 years, far above cost of living. So are we, why that, I guess?
It's consistent with the increases that are in the collective bargaining agreement for their labor increases. It just was executed, and I'm going to turn to see if anyone has any more detail than that. But and we welcome our partners at First Transit as well to weigh in. But as the labor agreement, we were seeing an increase in those years at some rate for all proposals because of the negotiated increases in the labor costs. Is there anything else there?
So, Director Pereira, also our state minimum wage is actually going up by 8%, and then 7% for the next 3 years. So this is in line with the cost increase with First Transit as well. And plus with the collective bargaining agreement, it's increasing because of the state wages as minimum wage raises as well.
And what percentage of the contract is wages?
It's a substantial amount. I want to say more than 80% of it, it's wages, because we have close to 100 drivers. Just wages alone is about close to $5 million.
I think it's 84%.
Wages and benefits.
Okay. Director Murphy.
So a 5-year term, the $52 million, so it's $10.4 million a year is the cost. What are our annual receipts from our funding sources each year, not taking into account the reserve, but just the ongoing funding every year?
No.
So we could go by state. So STA, it's anywhere between $2.5 to $2.7 million. Then we have federal funds, anywhere between $3.8 to $4.2 million, which is federal funds of 5307, 5311. And then we have LTF funds, which, depending on what our services are needed, it could vary from $6 million to 7.2. Then we have fare boxes, which is hovers around $800,000 to $900,000 a year. what we receive. Then we have UC Merced funding, which we get about $380,000, and plus measure fee.
What's the total?
This year, total is about $14 million, our revenue projection.
So we get 14 million and we only spend 10.4?
That the 10.4 is only for the operations and maintenance contract. So the 14 million is the entire agency budget.
Right.
The revenue to operate the entire transit agency.
You have administrative staff, fuel, equipment. We have to purchase parts for the buses.
So if we go with this recommendation, are we going to be sustainable going forward, or are we going to be spending down our reserve?
Yes, on both. We are confident that there's a path forward, that there are options that there are a number of potentials that we could pursue that could result in us not needing to tap into the reserve. In the scenario that we have in the staff report on page 181 that was here, this is assuming no increase. Like what we have budgeted is what we're only going to have budgeted. So it was a really kind of cautious approach. Under this scenario, we would need to tap into the reserve. Granted, no new funding sources, no new grants, anything like that, in the year 4, 5, and beyond. I don't think it's in maybe the back end of year 3. And the total that we came up for that was about $2.5 million. That is so worst case scenario, but that would be the other end of it. So on one end, between grants, we anticipate that there'll be at least minor increases to our funding sources. We already have new funding sources with Merced College. So these types of things aren't factored in. So that would mitigate the use of our reserve. But to your first question about is this sustainable, we can afford this contract if we're okay with tapping into the reserve up to that $2 million amount, assuming we make no other revenue from any other new sources.
So what would a proposal look like that was balanced every year without going into the reserves?
Just reduce it by $2.5 million, so around $48 to $50 million.
Okay, so what does that translate into in terms of service?
A reduction in service hours? That would be, gosh, I'm terrible at math off the top of my head.
So it'll be either anywhere between 10 to 15 to 20% reduction in service, just to meet. I think when we're in negotiations, I think a 20% reduction equals $1 million from the contractor, if I'm not mistaken.
20%. So that would mean the total cost is $5 million instead of 10.4, though.
Right, but if that's assuming we cut the service by 20%.
Our service hours.
Yes, service hours.
Which is they're at 140,000. 142,000.
Okay. Well, I just think that whatever direction we take, it should be paired with what our revenues are going to be during that period, rather than relying on our reserves. And frankly, it's going to put us in a tougher position, and when the contract ends, if we've been relying on our reserves to make up the balance, and then we're going to be faced with increases, I imagine, in the future as well.
So I agree. I mean, my goal, our priority, and I know Christine has talked to us enough about it over the last just 2 weeks, is to not have to tap into the reserve. We wanted to show that it's possible without, if we were crystal balling it, we have enough money with the authority right now to be able to make ourselves whole here, but it's our intention to not have to tap into the reserve. I mean, that's not what you want it for, but that's what it's there for. Like I said, we talked to a number of our partners in the Valley, and we have partner agencies that are completely depleting their reserve to continue to provide the service at the level that they need to in their community. That's not our intention. And I think that, we have, between the time we have to get to that year 3 plus the short range transit plan that we'll be doing, we have the time, and I think now the team, to try to explore a number of options to not have to tap into the reserve.
When you say reserve, do you mean LTF reserve, or do you mean a reserve more generally of all transit funds?
We have one reserve, and we don't have it separate from LTF. So I think what we have, when I say reserve, I'm talking about the reserve we've been talking about for the last year. It's largely populated by LTF, because it's, I think, actually the only funding source we have that can sit in an account unexpended. Right. I would hesitate to say it's only LTF, but it 90%. Right.
Right, and that's been sort of my point in a number of instances in these meetings about LTF and the reserve, is that there should be an LTF reserve, but the LTF reserve should be for LTF shortfalls rather than for everything, for every source of grant funding that's out there. And then just the overall theme that I think our expenses should match our revenues. And I hear what you're saying about a desire not to do that, but it just gives me pause.
The challenge is we don't know what our allocations are going to be in future years of these funding sources, so we assumed no growth. So we would have to project we could project a modest increase to these funding sources to pencil that out and try to close that gap. But I was trying not to be speculative, because I'd rather demonstrate kind of worst case scenario and then be able to deliver something that's above that.
Director Espinoza.
Thank you. I don't know if she had any comments or not yet. Okay.
She's brave. She's right up at the podium.
I did want to just quickly say, Christine Chavez, transit manager for MCAG. I wanted to just kind of emphasize the importance of the short range transit plan. That is a 5-year plan for the actual, feasibility of the system. It will analyze our fleet needs, our operational inadequacies. There's a lot of new trends in the transit industry that are turning into, that are considering micro transit, so maybe a little more user friendly. So maybe in those evening hours that we've requested additional service, we're looking at a little more of a local circulator that'll take you to the grocery store in the evening, where that's where the place you need to go, and it'll also help make us have it'll also help us provide a more efficient system, so that more revenues are coming from our ridership. Right now, I'm not certain of the fare box, so I apologize, but the more efficient system that you have, the more ability you are able to collect from the actual users of the system. And then it will also lay out our fleet plan, by which we would be able to determine what the match need would be for some of our capital costs. And then that will help us be in a better situation to go after those grants, to see what our actual needs are for the system, whether it's operational or capital funding. When we have it all laid out in a 5-year plan, it gives us a good footprint as to what direction we should be headed.
All right.
That was a great question, Director Espinoza.
Well, my comments is, what I look at is service, to make sure that if First Transit receives this contract, that we ask that it be professional service, because I don't think we're getting it right now with our provider, and that it treats its employees with best. I know I don't want to get into salaries and all that stuff, but that's between you and the employees. But I think we seek professionalism, because we hear about all the problems. Sometimes they come to us, and we don't want to deal with that. That's confidential, and whatever issues they come. But right now we're not, in the service or the maintenance of the buildings too. We have a brand new building and transit center that's not being taken care of right now by the current provider. That's coming to us, and we don't need it. Hopefully, like I said, it's more professional, and because if you maintain it, the employees are happy, everything flows, and it doesn't need to come to us, and it doesn't need to become public. But if it reaches us, that's what I seek, is that everybody is working properly, and that the administration is working properly with you guys, and it's not getting into each other's businesses. And sometimes you have to deal with that, but that's what I seek, is professionalism with our staff and the providers. So thank you, and employees. Thank you very much.
Director Villalta.
So Director Espinoza didn't ask, so I will. The salaries, have we conducted a salary study to make sure that we're not going to have the same problems that were listed below or before with low-paying jobs, and we're going to be paying a fair wage to the drivers? How are we addressing that?
Director Villalta, that the drivers, dispatchers, and other employees operating the system are not our employees. They are employees of the contractor. The contractor does set those wages, but I believe there is a collective bargaining agreement in place that does set the majority of those already, and I believe it was well negotiated and generous to the employees.
All right, so it's better than it was before, so we can attract drivers. That's what I'm asking.
That's my understanding.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And I will share a comment that in recent discussions with National Express, they've already indicated that the collective bargaining agreement in place has already had a positive impact on their ability to attract and retain drivers.
Because part of the problem is, I mean, if we're going to switch companies, we want to make sure that the ills that occurred before are not going to occur again, and that we meet these needs beforehand and bring it to this body before we approve that contract. So, thank you.
Thank you. Director Silvera.
So I got a few comments. Is number one, I wasn't here, but man, it seems that when this original contract, the contract that we're living in now, was negotiated, so, you go back to the old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. In my short time here, I know that, and this is coming from the employees that of the provider that we have now, and I don't want to disparage anybody because I don't know any of you personally. I just can tell you, as my other hat that I wear as Board of Supervisors, these folks feel like sometimes they don't have any place else to go when they come to our board meetings and share some of their frustrations. So any kind of move forward, to me, we need to take care of the people that are actually, they're the faces of the organization, right? It's called the bus, but the average everyday rider doesn't really care who the provider is. They just care that, the bus is there on time and being efficient. So I hope that moving forward, we would, that's it, and it sounds like this new group is going to put an emphasis if they already have a collective bargaining agreement in place. The other question is, so I just want to understand, and I asked you, Stacy, and I don't know. So I came up with a number of roughly about what is the current reserve? Do we have that number? What is our current reserve?
Current reserve for operations is $7.2 million.
$7.2 million. Okay, so by my math, assuming that the revenues stay flat, right, and so that's a big assumption because I would imagine that over time revenues, our revenue sources would go up a little bit, and I know some of them are dictated on gas tax, and they can go up and down with what that does, but this is assume they stay flat. At the end of the contract, we will, well, I guess before I give you my big number I came up with over here, at what rate does our reserve grow every year? Do we not know? Is that an
That's an unknown. Part of the conversation, and Nav's going to say something else that's probably going to contradict me, but as I understand it, one of the discussions, why we started the discussion about a reserve policy was to put procedures in place to help establish how the reserve gets funded. So I'll talk to Nav about, or Nav can talk about how that has happened in the past, but we don't have a mechanism that says we're going to grow by 3% or put so much in. That's part of what we want to do with the policy. And we first wanted to establish what we needed that reserve amount to be, and we didn't feel that we could do that until we got this answered. So, Nav, is there anything else on the reserve?
So, I could say on my behalf, since I've been in charge of the budget, we have not been putting any money into the reserve. We only take enough LTF for the operation for that current year. I can't speak for 5 years ago, so the last 3 years we have not been taking any money to put into reserves.
Okay, so then by my math is over the life of this contract, if you look at the I called it $7 million for even numbers sake, we will be at the end of the contract, we'll needed $8.4 million of our reserve. And if you're telling me we have basically a $7.5 million reserve, I just want everybody to go into it eyes wide open. At the end of it, I think that this is the right move. I think it's time to cut our losses and move on. It seems like we in the original contract that was done, it was too good to be true, and it seemed very early that they came back and said that it was too good to be true. And so this is my estimation. They're trying to struggle to live within the contract that they agreed to, and I think that the service suffered because of it. So, but that being said, it is a pretty generous increase. It's 9% a year for the first 2 years, and then it's almost 10% a year increase. That's a pretty good increase there, and I know that the majority of that is going to the employees, and you did bring to light that just with minimum wage increases, that adds to it. I surely hope that we're paying these folks a little bit more than minimum wage. We're asking them to carry all of our bosses around on a daily basis, so I would hope that not that a minimum wage employee couldn't do it, but that we're paying these folks a livable wage. So it just overall, just everybody needs to know going into it, if we don't deliver on trying to find other revenue sources, not becoming more efficient within the system that we have, we're going to be staring down the barrel of cutting services, because that's the only other way I see how it works out in the end, is if you look at what current reserves are, where we're heading, we're going to have to figure out some alternative revenue sources. And I know that the college one's not in on there yet, and there's some different stuff. So there's that part of it. That's all I got for right now. Oh, I found it. How flexible? So we're talking about a 5-year planning document that's going to kind of tell us our inefficiencies and our efficiencies. These numbers that I see on my deal, 8.7 the first year, 9.6 the next year, so on and so forth, and it ends if we extend the second option to 12 million. How flexible is this contract that if it's going to take us a year, probably, I'm going to guess, to get this long-range planning document done, and then it comes back and it says, hey, we need to make these changes to the system. How flexible is the potential new group that we're going to go with to making those changes, and then what does that do to the cost, right?
So there's actually a couple of factors. When we did our RFP, we actually stated that the service was going to either increase or decrease by 10%. So the cost would reduce if we reduce service. I think we're also looking at putting language in our contract. I'll look at legal over there to maybe increase it by, instead of 10%, maybe 20%. So we have the flexibility, to decrease if we do decide to decrease our service or whatever it is. It will reflect the price.
Okay, and so I guess where I'm going with that is how do you measure? Is there a way to measure that? Like if we change X, it's going to cost us this more, and do we know that going into it today, or is that just something that you say, well, we got to kind of negotiate that at that point?
No, we pay actual revenue hours, so we only pay them for the revenue hours plus a fixed fee. So as revenue hours decrease, so does the pay that they receive. So we only pay them for actual service.
Okay, and so then these numbers are up to numbers. There's no guarantee that they're going to get paid 8.7 in the first year, all of that, unless they meet those service hours and plus the fixed stuff, right? Okay, and so if that comes in under it, we'll go down. Okay, thank you.
Director Laura. Oh, you're good. Director Aguilera.
Just real quick, just wanted to voice my opinion about this. I understand the concern that the contract should reflect expenses versus revenues, and not use our reserves. At the same time, I know that we've been looking for a new contract with a new company, and I'm very confident that the team will seek other funding opportunities and options like grants to hopefully not use the reserves. So I know it's a complicated item, and it's, obviously the amount of the contract is high, but I know that hopefully we don't have to use our reserves, and Stacy's team could pull in and look for other funding sources.
Director Murphy.
Yeah, I didn't catch the nuance of the exchange earlier. It's probably just I didn't understand it, but I thought when I was talking to Director Guzman, she said we hope not to use the reserves, but maybe $2 million, and then Director Silvera was saying we were going to use $8 million.
So the $2 to $3 million is in the 5-year term? which is the base year contract. At that point, we would have an option. It's our exclusive option to whether or not we would want to extend into years 6 and 7. It also, I think there's also the assumption when we looked at what we would need, when we did our analysis of what we would need out of the reserve, it included the Merced College and 100% use of LTF, correct? So that's just for the initial 5-year term, which is what we would be held to under this action, and then any additional years 6 and 7 would be, that's our goal, is trying to get out and to be able to have a plan that makes us whole, so that we're not having to tap into it beyond that 5-year term, or even in that 5-year term for that matter. But that's a good distinction. Our estimate was for the 5 years.
And then just another distinction, I mean, you can be in favor of transitioning to a different provider, but also have reservations about the scope. I mean, you could transition to a different provider with a different scope. I mean, ask for a reduction in service that really matches the revenues. But I think, this is a question, I don't know the answer. I mean, it seems like what has been asked was to just keep the same level of service regardless of the sort of revenue. What it would cost to keep the same level of service with a different provider. Is that what was asked? Or not?
The discussion of...
For the RFP, I mean, what did the RFP say? Was it to keep the same level of service that we have?
Yes.
Or, as opposed to matching the service with the revenues that we have?
And that what the short range transit plan would define is what the actual service should be. Currently, we didn't know it was going to be that much more. We thought it was a modest increase overall, but with the collective bargaining agreement and minimum wage going up and all the costs, we just couldn't foresee it was going to be $52 million.
Right. So in a different context, right, when we go out to bid for something, if it came in over bid, we would say, oh gee, this is going to cost too much, so we need to refine the scope of what we're asking for, right? Like on a public works project, for example. Oh, this road is going to cost too much. We're going to do something different. We would change the RFP and have it match the dollars that we receive. Here, it looks like that additional step hasn't been taken. It's just been, oh gee, it's higher than we thought, and we're just going to sort of push forward anyway.
It was higher than what we thought, so we went through a 3-month negotiation process with the proposer to get that cost down. The way that with this service, I mean, we making a decision on how to reduce service in a kind of an arbitrary environment, meaning we have nothing to base how to make those changes, where to make those service reductions. So that's the intent of moving up the short range transit plan, is that will help us identify either how do we find the funding sources to match the service, or how do we make service efficiencies so that we don't have to reduce service to match our budget, or how do we reduce the service to match our budget. So that kind of informed dialogue is not something that we would be able to do without that level of assessment, and that generally takes about a year. And the contract language does allow us to do a reduction up to 10%. We would hope not to have to reduce it more than that, but if that is the option, we would have that flexibility to exercise that once we're in contract.
And when we wrote the RFP, we did include the request for the 10% flexibility up or down, as well as some of the pending kind of situations like the unmet transit needs that was going on. I think we've gone through 2 cycles since this was out to bid. So we're aware of some of the situations that were coming up and made their bid accordingly, or wrote their bid accordingly.
Director Laura.
Thank you. So just a comment that our unmet transit needs throughout the years consistently show a request and a demand for increase in services. So for us to even consider decreasing services shouldn't even be on the table. I know that staff has done their due diligence, and I believe that if they had no confidence in this recommendation, that they wouldn't even be on the table for discussion. And just to point out, Director Aguilar's comment earlier, it's not Stacy's team, it's our team, and it's our responsibility as the board to give staff clear direction, confidence, and trust for them to make the recommendations and for them to do their job. And it took them 12 months, like they've been saying, to get this on the table. So I'd like us to take that risk with them. And we all know that projections are projections. We don't have a crystal ball. So with that, if there are no other questions, I'd like to move to approve staff recommendation.
I have a motion on the floor. No.
I second.
I have a first and a second. At this time, I'd like to open up for public comment. In doing so, I'd like to say that Directors Oliveira, Director Villalta, Director Espinoza, and myself were part of the last negotiation. And so when we look at these numbers that are put before us today, the original bids were very similar to what we have before us right now. And we had a very lowball bid that was actually accepted. So we've seen these numbers previously, but we went with the lowest bidder last time. So I just want to make sure we put that out there. Good afternoon.
Hello again, Jose Moran, Livingston, California. Just a couple of questions. I think the questions are great and the comments are great. And most of all, I think, once again, you guys have a great responsibility, and most of all, to be, to consider that fiscal responsibility and think about not being in the red, because I don't think anybody wants to be in the red. Just a couple of questions, and within this budget, I think one of the factors that is being considered is that previously approved MOU with Merced College. Is that until you guys decide? What happens if Merced College decides in 2 years or 3 years that they no longer want to be part of it? That is not feasible for them, or that the students decided to not consider with that additional increase in student fees? Then that is going to affect your budget to be able to cover this contract. And the other question is, what happens, the base contract is 5 years. What happens if within 2 to 3 years you guys are not happy with their service? And then can you cancel the service? Can they cancel the service? Can they cancel the contract? Or do you guys have to go out for the entire 5 years?
This is a comment period. Yeah, is there anybody else from the public that has any other comments?
Hi, Director.
There's a button to your left if you want to raise the podium up where the microphone is.
I think I'm
okay.
I think I can be heard.
Oh, and to your right, yes.
Okay. I'm Don Swain, Region Vice President with National Express. I really came in here today to thank you for your consideration, the time that we spent. We're really proud of the obstacles that we've been able to overcome, the quality of the service that we're now providing in particular. We're within a few people of being 100% complement of drivers, which is really a testament to the work that we've done, particularly since the labor negotiations concluded. The local team is really doing a great job, and I personally, I'm very pleased with the way things are turning out for us. I would have liked to have continued this contract, but that clearly wasn't in the cards. I think we've overcome many obstacles, done very good work, and I wish the bus the best going forward.
Thank you. So is there any other comments from the public? So I'll bring it up to the dais. Director Murphy.
The motion was to give the executive director budget authority. Is this going to come back for contract approval on another agenda, or this is the final vote?
This is the final vote. The wording is a little unusual only because we normally, the budget authority is what we ask when we ask for contract approval, but we changed the wording for budget authority explicitly because the contract was not ready for execution because of the final negotiations. So the actual authority you're providing is the same you would as if it said contract authorization, because in that action, you're providing me with the authority to execute that budget amount, but because we hadn't concluded our negotiations, the wording of the action is different. And I look to council if I've mischaracterized that.
So, the question is, wouldn't we want to...
This is the last one. This is the only action to execute the contract. It wouldn't come back again.
Okay, I find that irregular, but thank you for answering.
Okay, I have a first and a second. At this time, let's do a roll call vote.
Director Aguilar?
Yes.
Director Creighton? Director Espinoza?
Yes.
Director Hogue?
Yes.
Director Lohr?
Yes.
Director Murphy?
No.
Director Oliveira?
Yes.
Director Pereira?
No.
Director Silvera?
Yes.
I'm sorry, please repeat.
Yes.
Director Fialta?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Motion passes 7-2. Okay, we'll move on to item number 17, approve grant application submittal to Caltrans, Division of Rail and Mass Transportation for Federal Transit Administration Section 5339 Discretionary Bus Program for fiscal year 2019. And that is Nav. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you. This is basically taking advantage of opportunity to get some federal grants to purchase some buses that's aging for us. The fleet's pretty. There's some buses that are have already met their useful life, and so it needs to be replaced. Caltrans has this competitive grant out there, which the total funding is about $480,000, which the match will be coming from SCA SB1 funds that are supposed to be utilized for the building next door, which we're going to transfer to this grant right now. So, anybody have any questions? Oh, it'll be replacing 4 cutaway buses.
Any questions on the dais? I have a motion and a second. You get the motion was Lohr, the second was Aguilera. At this time, let's open up for public. Is there any comments on this? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the dais. I have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposition? Motion passes unanimously.
I just want to say, if I don't see you guys at the open house, happy holidays, happy New Year's, and be safe.
Okay, at this time, we will move into closed session.
You want us to turn our mics off?
Yeah. Hey, is your mic off?
recordings?
The recording, please.
Are you guys ready for my 10-minute staff presentation on end-of-year accomplishments?
Please queue up the 40 slide.
Place to go.
Queue up the 40 slide presentation.
Requesting my presence to sign some papers. I'm like, really? Sign some papers?
Well, staff met me at the front door as I'm walking in 5 minutes before the meeting, and they're like, can you sign this? I'm like, not a good time.
Did everybody go?
Nobody else wants to come in?
And Alicia. Alicia is the diehard.
Yes.
I didn't know that.
We did.
I think we already did, yes. Okay, we'll open it back up. We just concluded our closed session and staff was given direction. Now we'll move on to item number 21, Executive Director's Report. Stacy, you have a 40-page presentation.
I do. I'm going to do a summary of our 2019 accomplishments.
Okay.
I heard Director Silvera suggest short and sweet, so I'll leave it to two things. I hope that you can join us at our open house that started about 15 minutes ago. We will have Santa and all kinds of food and festivities, so we hope you can stop by. And I also just want to mention, which none of them are here to hear this, for the first time, I think, in the 16 months I've been in this role, we have now transitioned through, filled, and are now fully staffed, at least at the executive management team. And I'm really excited for 2020 because, Eric and Stephanie, who's walking in, and Christine, who's walking in, have been excellent additions to Nav and Alicia, Natalia, and Matt. And we really are building a strong team downtown and at RWA. So we're excited for 2020.
Very good. Now we'll go into number 22, Director's Reports. I know everybody likes to get long-winded. I think most of the long-winded guys already left, so that's good. Let's go to Joe Oliveira, the man who looks 20 years younger without glasses on.
Thank you. All I have is Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, and I hope everybody has a good one.
Thank you, Joe. Director Murphy.
So as you leave this evening, it's getting dark. There's a new addition to the Skyline to Merced.
Yes.
Tioga sign is lit up. So it's nice to have that back in our downtown.
Looks nice.
Looks great.
Director Aguilera.
Nothing to report, but Merry Christmas, everybody.
Director Lohr.
Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone.
Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's.
Director Silvera.
Good. Thank you for
Director Hogue.
Merry Christmas and have a happy holiday. We'll see you next month.
Director Espinoza.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Director Villalta.
Yeah, again, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and please apologize for me. MCAG, I'll apologize to you. We have a Golden Agers dinner, so I have to get back for that right now. And please, someone apologize to Adam for me. I won't be able to make his party either. So, too many parties on one day.
Very good. And as for me, Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy Hanukkah. Enjoy your holidays. And Happy New Year. We've got them all right there stacked up. At this time, I'll conclude the meeting. Thanks.